And let's say they go 5 years and they're always leaving 2-3 reps in reserve. And then for the next 2 years, they train with Leroy, Dorian Yates' training partner.
Oh, yeah.
You know, right? And they learn, I wasn't even scratching the surface of what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
Okay. They do that. They make progress. And they're like, okay, but this is just killing me. So after those 2 years, that person says, well, I'm going to go back to what worked. I'm now stronger. I think I can keep these loads in place. It's going to ensure pretty much that I'm going to keep this muscle. And they can go back to doing training with 2 or 3 reps in reserve. But now they've reset their psychology because they trained with Leroy for 2 years.
Yeah.
Now 2 or 3 reps in reserve may have been what training to failure was to them previously.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Muscle Minds with Scott Stevenson. I'm Scott McNally, and all of our programming is brought to you by True Nutrition. You can use our code THINK for additional savings on high-quality third-party tested supplements. They basically have everything you need. I've been loving their creatine lately. It's like the old school forgotten supplement that is getting me freaking pumped. I highly suggest that. Let me know if you have any questions about any of their products. We're also brought to you by BYOBBcoach.com. That's Scott's book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. It literally will take you through your off season, through your prep, all the way up to your contest day and your rebound. So check that out. You can do it really all yourself if you want to be your own bodybuilding coach. And thank you to everybody from Patreon. You guys are freaking awesome. I appreciate you helping us to make this thing happen. And if you're in Canada, check out supplementsource.ca. They've got great deals that change week to week. They support what we're doing. We support them. Today, we're going to talk about effective reps. It's something we talked about a couple years ago, and it's more or less been in our conversation ever since, but I thought it would be great to revisit because we have a lot more followers than the last time we had this conversation. And when you understand effective reps, it literally will change the way you do your sets, and it really points out the value and the importance of going to failure when you're an advanced lifter. Where do we start with this, Scott?
That's a very good question. Where do we start? I was just thinking there's so many little rabbit holes we can go down individually, and this is maybe follow questions that you have, or maybe something pops up from one of the listeners when we start digging into this, but probably should first kind of define the idea. And the premise is that only those reps nearing the end of a set that's approaching failure, being taken to failure, are the ones that are going to be effective for stimulating muscle growth. The best sort of single piece of evidence kind of pointing to this idea that, and this is connected with fatigue and metabolic stress being important for muscle growth, meaning that you need to produce some metabolic stress. It being thought of as at least a surrogate marker, if not a direct stimulus for what turns on muscle hypertrophy. And the best study I know is it's an old one. I've got it in my Fortitude Training book by Goto. They've done a lot of cool stuff. And they basically compared sets of 10 rep max with sets of 10, none normally just right up to the failure point, and sets of 10 with the equivalent loads, interspersing a 30-second rest interval between the sets. So you do 5 with the load, and then you rest 30 seconds and do 5 more. This wasn't like a DC-style rest-pause training, and that was all they did. So it wasn't like a muscle round where you do a set of 4 and you rest 5, take 5 breaths, rest 10 seconds, do a set of 4, until you go to failure. This was just 5 and then you're done.
Okay.
So the load was equivalent, right? The volume was equivalent, but you didn't have, they had that fatigue recovery that was happening mid-set. So you're never getting to those quote-unquote effective reps, the ones that are difficult, the ones that are hard. So that's the idea, is that you have to train hard. We can go back to this kind of generally misrepresented idea of general adaptation syndrome. We need to produce a stimulus that is unique in order to bring on the adaptations. That's connected with, of course, progressive overload. So if you keep on training or keep on doing something that isn't stressful, there's no stimulus for novel adaptation. So if you keep on training outside of the effective rep range, sometimes that's considered like 5 reps shy of failure. Of course, that doesn't make sense. Like if you're doing a set of 10 rep max and you're stopping 5 reps shy of failure, it doesn't mean if you do 6 rep sets with a 10 rep max load, that's not going to get you much. Maybe if you're a brand new beginner, yes. So the effective reps idea is that only the repetitions 5 or less close to the end of a set taken to failure are going to be the ones that are truly effective producing muscle growth. And this is what I think prompted this, as we mentioned. Steele's group did a meta-analysis looking at self-selected loads, and found that people are generally, I think the number on average between trained and untrained individuals is like 53% of a 1-rep max is what people are training at. Almost regardless, there's very little variation depending on what you ask them to choose in terms of the reps they should get in that set. So people tend to select lighter loads. You think, hey, I'm training with, if you look at the prediction equations, 80% of a 1-rep max on a big compound lift like a squat or a bench press or deadlift, that's going to give you like 8 reps.
Okay.
To failure, right?
Okay.
So 53% should be like a 30 rep set or something like that.
Yeah.
But you don't see people doing 30 rep sets, especially not to failure. And what we know from various studies is that people are atrocious at figuring out what their reps in reserve are.
Yeah.
So this is like big picture stuff. So one of the big sort of things to consider when evaluating effective reps is how far are you able to act or willing to train in terms of proximity to true voluntary muscular failure, set after set during your working sets. So if someone really is highly motivated, they've got literally their life's on the line, their family fortune, their sister, their brother, like everything's going to be gone.
Yeah.
Everyone's being held for ransom. Throats are going to get slit if they don't get 10 reps with this weight. That's highly motivated. Those people in that case, you might be able to go to your two sets, 2 reps shy of failure. That might give you, let's say, 3 effective reps if we believe this 5 number. Okay. But the thing is, most people are going to, for that 10 rep set, they might pick a load that actually is more like a 15 rep max load or an 18 rep max load, depending on how willing they are to train hard, how trained they are. That's a thing that develops, as you know, over time. You and I've talked about this a bunch. You've gotten a lot better at bringing yourself close to that failure point. Your training capacity, your mental fortitude, so to speak, is changed over the years.
Sure.
That's the idea of effective reps. It's based on this idea that it sort of in a blanket sense that you know where your failure point is, and then you could train and assume that you accumulate these effective reps. So that's the general idea. The thing is, it's absolutely 100% an important conceptual notion to keep in mind. The way it's generally applied is a way to tailor the strength of stimulus, the potency of each set, according to your training approach and according to your training volume. So some people, for instance, a perfectly valid way to progress over the course of a training cycle would be to gradually reduce your reps in reserve, as you tend to, and you could even keep weight the same or marginally progress weight and go from 3 or 4 reps in reserve to 2 or 3 reps in reserve to 1 or 2 reps in reserve over the course. And in that way, you're training with a volume you can recover from. You're accumulating these effective reps over time, and you're progressing. You've got a progressive overload feature built into your training regime that's based on your ability to effectively gauge your reps in reserve, right? So I think for someone who's honest and who can train really, really hard and is training like, actually this didn't really work out for Jordan Peters. I like to use him as an example of someone who, trains pretty much as hard as anyone on the planet. For some people that could be phenomenally effective over the course of time. And if they find it works, then that's great. If someone's a newbie, in those first couple of years, you don't really have to train that hard. There's no difference between failure training and non-failure training on average for newbies. But the thing also to consider there, and this is where this is kind of a nuance I think for people to consider, and this is connected to it's connected to the research as well. So if you have someone as a newbie, just continuing to train, and they're going to see progression in their loads, no matter what, over the first year or two, as long as they're eating and recovering and not, going out drinking every weekend or what have you, there's going to be some progression.
Yeah.
And if you're someone, let's say, who doesn't have a natural proclivity to train really, really hard, so your 10 rep, let's say your 10 to 12 rep sets are actually 15 to 18 rep max loads.
Okay.
And you're stopping those, let's say, at 10 reps or 9 reps initially, and then you're going to 10 reps and then 11 reps over the course of 8-9 weeks of training. You're actually maybe using an 18 rep max load. So you're doing 9, 10, 11 reps with an 18 rep max load. But for you, that's 3, 2, 1 or 4, 3, and 2 reps in reserve. So you're training with what you sense to be 2, 3, 4 reps in reserve when training on your own voluntarily. We took you into the lab and said, keep going.
Yeah.
You could get more. Because that's what the science kind of tells us, is that people have many more reps in reserve in many cases. So someone might say, okay, well, this works great for me. I'm using this reps in reserve strategy. I don't have to really increase my loads terribly. They'll go up on occasion if I'm paying close enough attention. I'm learning how to auto-regulate. And I'm going from 4 to 3 to 2 reps in reserve over the course of, every 2 weeks I jump a rep in reserve, something like that, right?
Okay.
But in actuality, you're training, you're training 6, 7, 8 reps shy of failure.
Yeah.
Right?
Because you never really learned what that true failure was.
Right. Yes. And you're not willing to do that on a regular basis. So you ascribe your progress to this auto-regulated reps, self-selected reps in reserve notion that you're applying. And some of what's happening is simply the fact that you've got a ceiling effect here. While you're going to grow with pretty much anything as long as you come in the gym and there's some progression, you've got to continue with stimulus. You're going to grow from it because you're relatively newbie. And I think one thing that's sort of an aside that's important is that first impressions are important. How you start off training, if that's your first 2 years of training, is always leaving something in the bank. Right? Always, and you're very poor at that. That then becomes your typical psychological set point, so to speak, for what hard training should be about.
Great point. Because
you've hardwired that in yourself. This is just sort of a very generic possibility.
Sure.
And so that's how you get used to training. And that would explain this meta-analysis that found that most people are picking between 50 and 60% of their 1 rep maximum as a self-selected load. If people are knowingly not training to absolute failure on a regular basis, and we know that people just typically don't. You just don't see people doing that in the gym. So reps in reserve, there's kind of a disconnect between what a true reps in reserve is when you're pushed to actually go to failure. And you were to do that in a scenario where you're highly motivated by researchers who maybe are screaming at you, or you got a training partner. Like a lot of guys train with women because it brings out the machismo in them. Women can train really, really hard. They don't want to get beaten, and they'll go for it, and they want to just show they're a badass, right? So there's a motivation there, hey, whatever it takes, to some degree, you don't want to necessarily tap into things that aren't psychologically healthy all the time.
Sure.
Focusing on hate and rage and that sort of stuff on a regular basis in your training
I did that for 8 years. I did that for 8 years straight,
I hear you. Yeah. So you're kind of maybe not the best thing. Not the best thing to, try to focus on how much you can impress somebody. But when you're motivated, you've got something else going on. So you may be in training people to if they're using reps in reserve which of course you're going to have to, in an unmotivated setting. You may be in training people to train as they tend to do anyway, as we see, they train way far away from what they're actually capable of doing.
Yeah. That's a big problem, man. And I wanted to just kind of So the way I remember it too, as far as effective reps go, that as you said, and I'm just kind of restating some stuff here for clarity and also maybe to clarify for any of the audience who hasn't followed along and to just explore it a little myself. But so, effective reps being, these are the reps that actually grow muscle. And when we're new in the gym, that all of our reps are probably effective reps because this is something that we've never done before. Now, the way I remember our conversation in the past going about it was the more trained we are, the fewer of those reps become effective. And maybe 20 years down the road, it really is only that last rep or the last couple reps possibly that could be an effective rep. Framing it that way has motivated me to always ensure that I'm getting everything I can out of a set. Because I've gone through, say, all the work to lift a particular weight, get it in place, a dumbbell press, a dumbbell row, whatever it is, a pull down, I don't care. But I set up and I've gone through these first 7 reps to get to the point where now I tell myself, now the work has begun. This is where and I don't know how many reps how many effective reps I have, but what I know is if I go to failure, I'm going to get all of them. Maybe it's the last 2, maybe it's the last 4, maybe it's changed for me since I had gotten sick and took time off at training and came back. Maybe I have more effective reps. I don't, lost some muscle. Maybe I could grow it back more easily. I don't need to go as far. But that to me has been a huge motivating factor to go to failure, because I recognize that just because I'm moving the weight doesn't mean that I'm growing. I need to get to a certain point where I'm actually hitting what we could call effective reps, the reps that matter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, a newbie, they don't get effective reps like the first 5 reps of a set of 12. Like if they stop there as a study, the coaching study I mentioned, there's nothing there. So, but some people that could be like that, literally, I mean, some people grow really well, some people don't. So that's exactly the way I've conceptualized it over time, is that you're going to need to your proximity to failure is going to be more important. Now there's some research evidence suggesting that for trained people that can be the case, that training to failure can be advantageous. And in order for a set to be something that stimulates growth, you're going to have a higher potency of stimulus. It's kind of like, adaptation to drugs, to alcohol, to what have you. Once you've got some adaptation to a drug, it takes more to get the same high, to get the same effect, the same side effects, or what have you. You get some adaptation. Of course, you go too far, and then your body starts breaking down.
Sure.
So we can, I don't want to go down probably shouldn't go down some of the rabbit holes about tension and metabolic stress and that sort of thing. Okay. The thing that is also part of that conceptual model, the way I sort of conceptualize it, this is sort of lumping together various aspects of the research and then what I've seen personally with clients too, and you see it in examples of people like Dorian Yates, is that you only have so much that you can recover from. Yeah. Right. And in the research too, when people compare studies, for instance, focusing on eccentric versus concentric, if we believe that tension is the primary driver of muscle growth, you get more tension in the amount of muscle that's activated during eccentric contractions. Okay. And eccentric contractions, when you make various comparisons, showed greater protein synthesis is turned on to a greater extent. There's also one study showing that training volume in this case was related to the extent of which protein synthesis was turned on, but directly related. So more training volume across conditions, more protein synthesis when measured after the period of adaptation to the first bout effect or the repeated bout effect. You get a lot of soreness and a lot of breakdown. Once you get past that, then you have nice relationships generally with protein synthesis that's incurred with each workout. So the stimulus that you bring upon yourself with each workout and the eventual muscle growth you have. But in this particular study, although training volume was correlated with protein synthesis, training volume was inversely correlated with the growth that happened over the course of the training regime. And that's because we don't have just a single straight linear dose response when in terms of what happens in terms of muscle growth over the long haul. The more is better, some degree. Then there's some optimal point, and this varies for everyone. And then if you keep on trying to do too much, then you run into a lesser adaptation. You try to train with 40 sets a week, 50 sets a week, 60 sets a week, etc. Eventually, you're not going to have any muscle growth, and you'll eventually then have overtraining if you try to do too much. So the thing that makes it difficult when we're looking at longitudinal studies, long-term studies, comparing failure training to non-failure training. So that's kind of the bottom line. If you want to be sure you got as many effective reps out of a set as you could, you just go to failure. Yeah, that's all you can do. You can't go beyond that. You got them all, right? So someone might say, well, shit, then we should see a clear impact of training to failure versus not training to failure, pretty much in all cases. So if we compare 10 sets, all effective reps, training to failure, with 10 sets, 3 reps in reserve, so cutting yourself short, 3 effective reps, we should see a clear difference in the 10 sets to failure versus 10 sets, and that would just be the case. But the problem is, for some people, 10 sets training to failure per week, in this example, might be too much to recover from. Right? So if you're trying to optimize how drunk you get, right? Eventually you're passed out if you drink too much. Yeah. You don't have a good buzz. Your buzz is beyond where it needs to be. So if you're trying to optimize your muscle growth, if you do too many effective reps by doing too many sets, taking to failure in this case, or just too many sets in general where you're close to your proximity to failure is very, very close, then you're simply doing too much. You may not be technically overtraining, and this is where it gets a little bit slippery. You can still make progress doing something that's suboptimal. Okay. And it satisfies the body, and this is what I've brought up several times too, it satisfies the tendency of bodybuilders to want to go with more is better, to make sure you got everything. It just happened to pop into my head. If you ever pressure washing your house, washing, like at my old house in Tampa, I pressure washed every once in a while I pressure washed the area by the pool. Okay. And there was a paint job there. It was like kind of a pinkish paint, and the mold would grow because there's an area where all the water would sort of settle and get really moldy, and I have to pressure wash that. And there was always this fine line, because I pressure wash enough to get all the shit off there, then the paint would get chipped away. Yeah, right? I knew where you're going with that. Yeah, right? I mean, it just popped in my head as a visual, right? So I'm getting clean, right? I'm like, but like you get, it's like, I got to get this last bit of mold. And it's like, okay, great. I got that last bit of, yucky nastiness out of there, but I completely eliminated the paint. So what am I left with? Like the huge chip in the paint. Right. Because I got obsessive about like getting every last bit. So you go into the gym, you're like, I got to decimate the muscle. Yeah, I got to annihilate, not just stimulate, as Lee Haney used to say. It's still a great saying, right? Yeah. And then you end up doing more that's optimal. You still clean things off. You still could you still have a clean patio around your pool. Yeah. And you still could make progress that way, but it could be far from optimal. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great analogy, man, and I think we can all relate to that, both from if we've ever done pressure washing, and I think we can all relate to that in the gym too. So what's our remedy there? How do we walk that line? How do we find out, how to get as close to getting all the mildew off without chipping the paint in the gym, of course? I think the first step, and I mentioned this in a podcast from a couple of weeks ago that I did, is that I think the theme of that podcast is, what are the things that turn on hypertrophy? It's like, well, you could say you should do this, this, and this, and this, but if it's not something that you can sustain over time, it's not a sustainable approach that you enjoy doing, it doesn't matter. You'll do it for a few weeks and then you're like, I'm not doing that. If you don't want to train, maybe DC training for your lifestyle and the way your body recovers, whatever your adaptive capacities are, would be the perfect way to train. But you don't want to train that way. So you just don't. So you have to sort of first figure out what you'd rather be doing. Would you rather do more sets, accumulate your effective reps? And this is where this concept is really phenomenal. Accumulate your effective reps by doing more sets taken with more reps in reserve,
Mm-hmm.
So you do 12 sets with 2 reps in reserve as opposed to 8 sets with 0 reps in reserve. That might work just fine for you. If you're doing that, and I think this is one of the issues, and this is another sort of basic principle I talk about. If you're doing that, the thing that may not occur, you may not be stimulating a progressive overload in this sense. So in another big picture, this is a DC training principle of mine too, is if you get brutally strong, assuming you're doing exercises where you've got a good mind-muscle connection, you're exercising, in the right breath range, et cetera, et cetera. If your performance increases, I'd like to think that form is going to follow function. So if you get, become a badass at doing 20 rep squats, and you got up where you're doing them with 405 pounds, your legs are going to show it, right?
Yeah.
And if you keep training, leaving a couple reps in the tank, you may not be able to, with that stimulus, set a stimulus in place where you, after you've recovered, you come back stronger and you progress. In order to do that, you then may need to go to fewer reps in reserve. Some of that could be purely neurological. There's an interplay between what's going on in the central nervous system, of course, and the muscle. So ideally, if everything is exactly the same over the course of years of training, your strength, let's say you don't get any better at doing the exercises, your activation patterns don't change, everything's neurologically identical. Your strength gains would come from more muscle mass. But there's also something to say for one, getting a better mind-muscle connection, figure out how to connect with the muscles that you're training, but also just learning how to train harder and evoke that greater training stimulus, and so that you can lift heavier weights eventually over time. So if someone is in that situation where they're training with reps in reserve because that's how they want to train, they don't want to bleed every time they do a working set, right? And they're not making progress, the thing that would be worth considering, more volume may be a possibility.
Okay.
It depends on how much they're doing.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things you can reconfigure, but in the context of effective reps, the thing that may be worth considering is you're going to have to train harder and thereby also do fewer sets, decrease your volume, and see if increasing the potency of each set by doing fewer reps in reserve, having more effective reps per set, is the remedy for not progressing. And from a motor learning standpoint, that may allow you, and a psychological standpoint, allow you to start training, learn what hard training is. And let's say they go 5 years and they're always leaving 2-3 reps in reserve. And then for the next 2 years, they train with Leroy, Dorian Yates' training partner.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And they learn, oh, shit, I wasn't even scratching the surface of what I'm capable of.
Yeah.
Okay. They do that. They make progress. And they're like, okay, but this is just killing me. I'm just, wiped out. Like I was, I don't have a wife. I just have the dogs. I took a nap with Suki yesterday afternoon. It was fine. Right.
Yeah.
But if you have familial obligations, you just can't be destroying yourself and living like a professional bodybuilder if that's not what you're getting paid to do. So after those 2 years, that person says, well, I'm going to go back to what worked. I'm now stronger. I think I can keep these loads in place. It's going to ensure pretty much that I'm going to keep this muscle. And they can go back to doing training with 2 or 3 reps in reserve. But now they've reset their psychology because they trained with Leroy for 2 years.
Yeah.
Now 2 or 3 reps in reserve may have been what training to failure was to them previously.
Absolutely.
So that may be something that you could periodize in on occasion and say, okay, I'm going to have to up the ante here because I'm not going where I need to go. I'm going to have to learn how to train harder. And over time, then it's not like, oh, geez, I don't want to do a set to failure. It's like, no, I've done that. Now it's relatively speaking, after having trained to true failure or given all you possibly can, it's not so much of a psychological stress. And you've readjusted. And that happens all the time to us. Like my leg, I have neuralgia paresthetica in this left leg. Yeah. And it every step, it always hurts continuously.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm working on it again. It's been going on for years, but and people with back pain is another example. If that pain came on without having had a background history of that back pain, those people oh my God, they just want to do nothing, lay in bed and moan. But over the course of time, you get used to that, you get adapted to that, and you have a psychological set point that gets shifted.
Yeah.
And that can happen, I think, in training. So you add in those trainings like, okay, this is only going to be short-lived. I'm going to do a 6-week training cycle where I'm going to go to 0 reps in reserve, let's say, not actually to failure. That can be dangerous and very inconvenient if you're having to unload and load weights on barbells and that sort of stuff. So I'm going to go to 0 reps in reserve, and then and then see what happens, and then I'm going to go back and then look at those loads in my logbook, and now literally go to 2 or 3 reps in reserve, same relative RPE or reps in reserve, but now you've changed your perspective on what failure really means. So that's one strategy. The other strategy is just to include occasional sets that are to failure, and that's sort of what I have people doing for practical reasons and just recovery reasons. Is only during loading sets, or I'm also around. Not all of your sets are to failure, but with loading sets, let's say you're doing a tier 3 thigh loading set regime. That's squats, knee extensions, squats, hamstring curls, squats.
Okay.
Right. So the first 2 sets of squats aren't taken to failure. Right. 1 to 2 reps in reserve. Didn't have that terminology didn't exist when I wrote the book, but 1 to 2 reps in reserve, because then you don't want to fail on the first one. Then you've got 400, 500 pounds, 300 pounds, whatever. You got to unload and get the bar back up. And things are done on a time schedule, so you can compare performance across the weeks. So you're only taking that last set to failure, right? And what happens, I think, to people over time, and this actually happens within Fortitude Training, is the same psychological resetting, is the pump sets. And this is how I like to train in general. This is another thought. Is make the most, and this goes beyond effective reps, is you do these pump sets, and those could be a shitload of partials. So you can maybe go to where you're 0 or 1 reps in reserve, and you're like, okay, I can either do 1 more rep that might have a 3 to 4 second duration up and down, or I can squeeze out 12 seconds of partials and make it really, really hard. And if we trust in this idea that those high effort contractions or high effort where you're activating all the motor units you possibly can, or nearly all of them at high firing rates relative to what your spinal cord is going to allow, because there's a muscle wisdom principle that comes into play here. You then can take those, what would be, let's say it's the last 2 reps that are effective. And instead of doing 3 reps, you do 2 reps, and you take what would be that last rep that would be a 3 or 4 second effort, and you turn that into a 12-second partial effort. Now you've taken, if we look at think of the time under tension notion, which I think makes sense when we're comparing relative effort and relative load, you've now taken 3, 3, and 3 with those 3 reps, so 9 to 12 seconds, 3 to 4 seconds each, and you turn that into 22 seconds of effective contraction time. Yeah. Effective time under tension. I'm coining that term right here and now, actually.
Effective time under tension. I like it.
No, seriously, I'm glad I'm surprised I didn't come up with it before. The idea of time under tension and like picking up, it fits really well with the effective reps notion, because people talk about that in the context of, taking a load and how much time you spend while you're contracting. And like if you do a 1 minute, the first 30 seconds is easy. It's not doing anything. It's only the high effort periods when you're really having to push. So you may then go back to this scenario. This person doesn't really like to train to failure. You may only have the last set on your exercise be a failure point.
Yeah.
Right. And then you take that out. So you can periodize that, or you can do what I like to do is say, and it's exactly what you said, Scott. Like, it's like I took all the time to put all this weight on this thing. I might as well get as much effective time under tension, or many effective reps as possible.
Yeah.
If I'm going to only do a few sets, I would rather do, instead of doing, let's say, 3 sets, a way to kind of do this fits with how cluster sets work, is to do, and it fits exactly with what pump sets are in Fortitude Training, is you do those sets, and then you, instead of having just a traditional singular repetition, you take that last possible repetition and you extend that into a tortuous set of partials, right?
Yeah.
And then you accumulate effective time under tension. I really like that term. It kind of rolls off the tongue.
It really, it's good. And it kind of, you already have the understanding of of the effect. I like it. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good.
Someone's obviously said it at some point somewhere else, but I hadn't heard it before that I remember. So that's a way to do, and that's what's done in the pump sets. Is the idea is to literally, and the nice thing about the pump sets, the way I've set them up in Fortitude Training, is you wouldn't do those with squats, right?
Yeah.
Because that's pardon my French, that's brutal to get under the squat bar and think about doing partials. Like, that's just a nervous system. But if you're doing an isolation exercise,
extensions,
like a pec fly or extension or something like that, and your whole idea there is to really connect with as much of a mind-muscle connection on the muscle you're trying to train, and extend this effective time under tension. So you do those partials at the end. When you find that portion of the range of motion where neurologically you've got a good mind-muscle connection with the muscle you're trying to target, and you just take the best part of the range of motion, the best part of that exercise, and milk it for all it's worth.
Yeah.
And that is what the pump sets are about. And it's nice to do that when you don't have the distractions, let's call them, of having to activate a lot of accessory muscles like you would with a squat. Your lower back isn't about to give out. You're not rounding your back at the end of the squat because you're starting to have fatigue there. So
one thing I was really thinking too. So really, when we talk about effective reps, when we talk about reps in reserve, it sounds to me like, and I guess this is the thing, and I think it was Ron Partlow that said this recently on one of the podcasts, that he said his problem with reps in reserve is that so many people aren't training to failure anyway. So I think the real moral of the story here for me is, in order to use reps in reserve, we first need to learn how to go to failure. In order to get all of our effective reps, we need to go to failure. I feel like failure training is the foundation, and that, when I was in art school, we would say, you can definitely break rules in art, but the key is to first understand what the rules are,
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe the big problem with a lot of the old school guys that have issues with some of the new school ideas in training. It's that there are a lot of people that haven't understood the rules and haven't taught themselves, like you said. I loved that part, Scott, where you said, you're going to reps in reserve for a period of time, your first 2 years of training. Then you train with somebody who's really intense. You redefine what failure is. Then when you go back to reps in reserve, it's you discover that what was once 2 reps in reserve, now you've got a lot more. That was actually 5 reps or 6 reps or 9 reps in reserve. Yeah. And it's something too, I think, to understand failure, it's something that you don't just figure out the first day. It's something that you keep redefining. So at the same time, if you continually go to failure on everything you do, every workout, you will bury yourself. It just eventually you need some type of a break. I could see how, and like you said, in Fortitude Training, and John did that in his training too. Not every single set was to absolute failure, but it was with the understanding that you were there were times that you really were going to absolute failure. It was not all reps in reserve. So I'm just thinking of the newer guys that are watching this and who have hung this long, 40 minutes into the podcast. I guess that would be my big take-home point, would be first learn how to go to failure before utilizing reps in reserve, and get everything you can. Like I said, I'm just going to reiterate too, learning about effective reps, that changed everything for me with training. It gave me such more a sense of understanding. I always went to failure, but it gave me such a better understanding of the value of it, especially being 20 years plus in. It's like, hey, if I put all this work into getting here, then I damn well better get everything I can out of this set,
Yeah. Yeah, you said a lot there, man. I mean, again, if you start off doing reps in reserve when you're first going to grow like a weed, you may attribute the reps in reserve strategy to your growth. which would have been, it may have been equivalent whether you trained to failure or not. And of course, training to failure at that point is not really training to failure relative to what you'll be able to do later on at times. The other thing I got asked this a long time ago, and it was about the time a lot of studies were coming out with failure versus non-failure training. It's like, well, do you really, like in Fortitude Training, do you really need to take like that last loading set to failure? Why not just stop, there? And my thought then, and it still is pretty much the same, is that you don't know really how many reps you have in reserve unless you've actually gone to failure.
Yeah, you don't know what the line is until you don't
know what the line is. Yeah. And I've heard from clients who've done Fortitude Training, and the way, like, let's take that squat, that thigh example where it's quad or squats, knee extensions, squats, hamstring curls, squats, and I've heard from people, like, let's say they got it set up with, let's say, 325. So you might end up lowering the load over the course of those. You stick within a rep range of like 6 to 12 on those sets, and you might end up lowering the load. So they might load it up, let's say, with 325, so 245s and a 25 each side, so they can pull down from 325 to 275. Just makes it convenient just to drop those quarters, so they stay in their rep range. So what might happen, and this is when people are first figuring these things out, if they haven't done a lot of training to failure, is they do their set of 315, and let's say they get 9 reps, right? And they think they could have gotten maybe 11. That's their sense of things. Totally fine. The next set, let's say they drop it to 275 because they want to stick about that, and then they get 8 reps, right? So we got like 2 minutes rest between these sets. So they're not fully recovered. So you're expecting some fatigue set by set. And so they get 9 reps. And then you keep going, you would expect fewer reps if they were, let's say 9 reps, and let's say they think that was 11 rep set if they went to failure on that second one. So now they get to the third one, it's the same load, it's 275 again, and they go to failure. And what I would often see is, like, they don't get 11 reps, which would be more than you would expect because they're fatigued because this is they're on their 5th set now in the sequence. They get like 15 reps, right?
Yeah.
A lot more than they would have expected. So you would expect maybe 9 reps on that one. That's what I typically see with myself, and I expect, like, that's about normal. So you do, the first one was 9 reps, and the next one is 9 reps, and those are 2 reps are the same weight. You're going down you're dropping down over some time, and you would expect you're going to lose at least a couple reps with that same weight, 275. So if I'm leaving 2 reps in reserve on the first set with that weight, and on the last set I get just that many reps, that means, I probably had, if I'd have left 2 reps in reserve, it would have been 7 reps, but instead I got 9 reps. That makes about sense. Which when you get 15 reps, it's like, oh, I was way underestimating.
Yeah.
So that tells you from that failure set what you actually had in reserve on those previous sets.
That's a great test, and it's something I think, if you're newer and you're listening to this, that's a great way to evaluate your reps in reserve, or how many you're actually doing, right? Mm-hmm.
And that is, and actually in DC training there was sort of a psychological resetting involved, because that's a system where all your working sets are to failure.
Yeah.
Right? But the volume's relatively low on those working sets. You can there's a volume component by how you do your warm-ups.
Yes.
That will vary substantially. But when you do those Widowmakers, so let's say it's a squat Widowmaker, what you're doing is accumulating effective reps. And you're accumulating reps that are at the 1 to 2 reps in reserve, or even the 0 reps in reserve. You may, when you stretch it out, if you're someone who's gotten really good at reps at DC training Widowmakers, you may get 4 or 5 reps that are at 0 reps in reserve.
Yeah.
Now, like, how can that be? Well, you're resting between, right?
Right.
If you tried another rep, you could made your reps continuous, you would have failed. So that was a 0 reps in reserve, unless you take a break. Right? Yeah. So you do those every time you do squats or what have you. And now you've experienced knowing what it's like. If I try another rep, I'm not getting it.
Yeah.
You know this. And you get that, which is an experience that some people will never experience in their entire lives. truly
That's a
be
shame.
there.
That's a shame. It really is, man. That's what it's all about, if you ask me.
Everyone should suffer in this regard. Yeah. But the thing is that then like, and this is what happens over the course of time, learning how to do those DC trained Widowmakers, is when you first do them, like, first it's just like, I'm just going to shoot for 20 reps and you get them and you just stop. Like, that's the way most people do. Yeah. They might do like 15 and do like 5 and they just stop. It's like, no, you had like 7 or 8 more, right?
Yeah.
And over time you get used to feeling what 0 reps in reserve is, and you make some mistakes. You're like, you're trying to get up to those numbers, so you maybe do 12 and you do 3 more, and then you do 2 more, and then you try to do 2 more, and then you just fail.
Right.
You're like, I shouldn't have gone for that second rep on that last section of my Widowmaker. I should have done a single rep and then rested.
Yeah.
Because you learn the next time, and that's what happens. And this is actually a great time for this effective reps notion too. Is the Widowmakers are totally effective. They also dig into your recovery reserves pretty substantially because your nervous system is whacked. That's why Dante had those for compound moves for legs at the very end. That's why Widowmakers are the last thing you do, because you're basically shot. So
yeah.
You do biceps at the beginning of that workout, not at the end, because your biceps would be sort of beyond most people if they'd done the Widowmaker correctly. So eventually, you may not have even adapted necessarily, but your reps on your Widowmakers get better just because you know how to strategize doing those.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Big Dave Smith, he did that pros versus pros squat thing. You can find those old videos. And I think at that time he'd been doing DC training for like at least 5 years. So he had a lot of, and Dave his jiu-jitsu experience, Dave knows pain and effort, right?
Yeah.
And
cardio stamina to boot,
yeah.
you know?
Oh yeah. Of course he's got all that in his favor. And Dave's just he's a recovery freak anyway. Like, guy's just amazing. But you can get more reps just because you learn how to strategize the Widowmakers. So what happens then is you then know what your reps in reserve are, what your capabilities are. Problem I had is I started applying Widowmaker strategies to my non-Widowmaker sets so I could get more reps.
Hey, I think we've all done that, you know.
Oh, of course.
Think we all have.
Everyone does it.
You know, in fact, I think that here's what I've seen too is because a lot of times when I have a new client, when we're working on training together, I want to see video. And a lot of guys will pause every rep. They get on a leg press, a set of 10, they get 1, and then they lock out and hold. And then they drop it down and get 2, and then they lock out and hold. And they do that for their entire set. And if I tell them, hey, let's focus on trying to get constant reps for as many as you can, and we'll, not increase the weight, might even have to decrease the weight, and instead, let's work to a point where we can get 10 constant reps. And that doesn't mean just buzzing through them. You're still using good slow negatives, control technique. I think that in itself is a way to move forward. But I've seen that where guys that's all they do. In fact, my knees will testify to the fact that I used to do that. It's the quickest way to get joint injuries too, man. If that's the only way you train, pausing between each rep.
Yeah. The thing we haven't touched upon is that not all "quote unquote" effective reps are equal, so to speak.
Ah, yeah, okay.
3 or 4 reps shy of failure. That fourth rep, before the end of your set, is not the same as that last rep.
Yeah.
In terms of the likely stimulus that it may provoke, is in terms of what you're learning in your nervous system. So with the Widowmakers, it's like doing those 0 reps in reserve repetitions are the ones where you really learn what maximal effort feels like, and what would feel like if you and learn by trial and error that another rep wouldn't be possible.
Yeah.
What may be going on there? This is a rabbit hole. To what extent is muscle damage, important and necessary? Obviously, you don't need to have incredible muscle damage. There's a really nice study where they produced just as much muscle growth with a group that they brought in very slowly. They gave them like 3 weeks of pre-training before like a regular 12-week training regime. And they prevented the elevations. I think they measured CPK, creatine phosphokinase, which is an indicator of muscle injury. They prevented that. And at the end of the day, they added 3 more weeks of training, but the muscle growth was equivalent in the 2 groups. So they didn't have really any substantial elevations in CPK. So they didn't have, a traditional measure of muscle growth. So muscle damage isn't absolutely the end all be all. But there's something going on potentially in terms of the stimulus when you've got that all-out effort in that last rep, and I think potentially involved with the nervous system learning how to drive greater efforts in the future. So there's an interplay between. So you may have a greater stimulus if we extract back to that go-to study that I started off, where you literally are avoiding effective reps by interspersing in a 10-rep set a 30-second break in between the first 5 and the last 5. That would suggest that you're getting 0 effective reps from each of those. If you go to seven reps, well, you might if everything were a perfect world and we were humans were lab rats, you would see sort of this continuum whereby let's say you do sets of 5 with 20 seconds in between and 10 seconds in between and then 0 seconds, a straight set. You would see with 30 seconds no growth, 20 seconds you don't quite have the fatigue recovery, so that last set of 5 you might get 1 effective rep in there. And then when you do 10 seconds, you might get 2 effective reps. And let's say, just using this term very generally, we do them straight, and then you get 3 effective reps. So you would see a dose response there. The more fatigue and the more effort you have at the end of your set, the more effective reps and the more growth that would then produce.
That makes sense.
There may be something going on there in terms of what the muscle is experiencing in terms of a stimulus. And what happens, and you see this when people are really pushing and they get that tremor,
yes,
or you're pushing everything. You've got an all out, and it's one of the things that probably contributes to muscle damage is, and this repeated bout effect is that your nervous system is trying to figure out what the hell's going on here. The first time you do an exercise that's novel, especially that are with eccentric contractions, you get really sore. And you actually see, for instance, a crossover effect in this. So you train the one leg doing eccentric only, and then if you look at the damage, and then if you train the other leg, which hasn't experienced anything, right? It's never undergone that first bout. You do see a repeated bout effect that crosses over to the previously unaffected, untrained leg,
which says that it's not in the muscle then. At all, or
some
not,
of it
not,
is.
Yeah,
some of it is
not at all, but
potentially. But some of it's in the nervous system. So something about those uncoordinated. And you see the same example I always give is like, let's say you're doing deadlift varieties. It's the easiest one, and you go from doing rack deads to now you do banded deads. And your reps and set schemes and reps, everything's all the same. You've just slightly changed the loading curve of the exercise, which means in order to execute those, to some degree similarly, you have to have a different activation pattern, and your system has to figure that out. So you've done months and months of rack deads with just the barbell, and now you add chains, and you get really sore the first time. So my sort of theory is that something about taking those sets to failure is that the nervous system is getting a novel stress, and it may not be totally sure how to go about activating. It may have a somewhat uncontrolled, unregulated, less than smooth or optimized activation strategy. Because it's very complex what's going on amongst the motor units. Motor units are being turned on, turned off. Firing rates can be kind of intermittent to some degree. Create forces in certain motor units, and you've got shearing between fibers of different motor units. So you could create, if you have this happens with electrical stimulation, is it's totally unlike what the nervous system does when it's activating motor units. Just turns them all the ones that are activated just turned on at the same firing rate, whatever you set the machine to do. And you get a lot of muscle damage when you do that. And that's a whole other kind of side topic. But I think there's something potentially going on in those all-out efforts that are extraordinarily different, where the activation strategy employed by the nervous system could be one that creates more muscle damage. And for someone who already has whatever adaptations explain this repeated bout effect, it may be that they need to have something new and novel and different in terms of activation of that muscle that's already got the repeated bout effect in place. That only happens in that last rep or two before failure. So all the other ones are easy. That's stuff you're used to. It's that last one when you're really grinding, that's the one where your nervous system isn't quite sure what the hell's going on. Sometimes you can psychologically, it's probably something going on. You can sense the nervous system will just like kind of like, you see people when they're especially not good, they're not good grinders. They push and push and push and push, and all of a sudden the weight just drops down. It's like, okay, you gave up, you know. Yeah. Or you see, but even with power lifters, you've seen guys. This happens all the time on a deadlift, and they're just, it's like total grinder, right? And they're getting up, they start to do this thing with the ball. They're bouncing all over the place. Yeah, that's inhibition, right? That's motor inhibition going on. So like their nervous system is like you're pushing, and the tensions are so high. In this case, tensions are different than maybe at the set of 10 because it's a 1 rep max for these guys, or even beyond that they don't get it. But your nervous system is trying to figure out what's going on in that last rep, and I think that might be something that creates more muscle damage, eccentrics, and damage in the right amount to the right degree, turns on protein synthesis and gives you that novelty of stimulus that you may not be afforded if you're not taking your sets to failure. Yeah. So once again, there's this cool interaction between the nervous system and the muscle that's happening in that magical moment of grinding out that last rep, or trying to get that last rep that you may not actually get because you fail.
That's cool. I would love to explore this some more, and it's something, honestly, for selfish purposes. I haven't gone into it, but after having gotten sick, my training has been different, and my ability to go to failure is different, and my response to going to failure has been different. I could ask you a ton of questions, but I don't think it would apply to the majority of the audience, so I left that stuff out. But that said, we did have a bunch of comments and questions. If we could shift our attention to them. Number one, we had some celebrities in our industry with us. Nick Wary, competitive eater, is with us, and he made it. This is exactly what I was saying. The only people that truly know where the edge is are the ones that gone over it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That said, I don't think I want to be around when Nick goes past his edge in competitive eating, because I don't want to be there to see that, man. That's that would be a mess. Yeah. And Rick Collins was with us too. He said the brain and brawn dudes, brain and brawn dudes. That's cool.
The man.
Yeah, Rick's awesome.
That Rick stuff stepped in. That's badass.
We had some
Nick and Rick.
Yeah, we had some questions too. Let's see. So some of this stuff may be related. It looks like some of it isn't. Morton has one that looks like it's related. He says, do you think there is a minimum, maximum, or an optimal number of effective reps during a session or across a microcycle of training? You could ask the same question about work sets done with 0 to 2 reps in reserve. I assume it could be body part specific. Do you have any personal views on this?
Leave that question up so I can kind of look through it. Absolutely. Yeah. It's going to be so variable across people. So like I said, what constitutes an effective rep? Oh, thank you. Yeah. What constitutes an effective rep is going to vary depending on the person. It's also going to vary depending on the muscle. I was thinking about this the other day. You, for instance, Scott, your calves are just world class, right? You don't really have to train. You don't train them. And whenever you have, they just get this crazy pump. You've got this magical innervation to your calves, and, it comes from, probably your biomechanics and whatever it is led you to constantly walk on your toes when you're a kid. Yeah. I saw Flex Lewis put a video up. I think it was on Instagram. Okay. And it was like, and he basically, I laughed because, he's being totally honest. He's like, so here's how, there's something like, here's how to train calves, but I don't train calves. Right? Because I don't think he does train calves. His calves are just crazy. That's just how they are.
That's generally what I tell people too. I tell people what I see work for clients of mine and what I've seen work for others,
Right. So for some people, they have phenomenal growth, they have phenomenal adaptation, and they don't really have to worry about effective reps. Effective reps are just walking around. Yeah. Right. And so the question was about being body part specific, and then on others, they may have to take, and calves are just a phenomenal example because of people having all sorts of this levels of success with different regimes.
Yeah.
So you may have to literally, and this is a limitation with the effective. Gosh, sound like I'm pimping out my own concept now. This term I sort of pseudo coined here with effective time under tension, but you may have to find out for you what effective time under tension is, and what effectively is the kind of tension that you need. So Dante, once again, with so many things, was sort of ahead of his time in that he was. I lost you. Blacked out.
I hit a button on accident.
Okay. In that DC training calf.
Oops, I didn't hit that button. We lost Scott. He was talking about DC training calves. Oh, I hear him in the background still. There he is.
Okay.
I didn't do
I
that.
saw that I froze. Sorry about that.
Yeah, you said
do something here. I think I know why that happened.
All right.
I was shifted over to Facebook so I could read the questions. I'm going to just rely on you.
Okay.
So. Yes, it's going to be body part specific and DC training calves. Totally different way. Those sets are taken to failure. So you're getting as many effective reps as you can, but you're outside the effective rep paradigm there, right?
Okay.
This idea of doing partials at the end of a set, what I've suggested to clients, especially the people mentioned in podcasts, is, and this is why I've set it up, sort of formalized it in Fortitude Training this way, is when you're doing those pump sets, those would be auto-regulated in a way where how you set up your pump set, how and whether you do partials is going to be dependent upon you, right? So it could be that you don't have, effective reps per se, but you're shooting for effective number of partials or effective time under tension, and that being something you're trying to use to increase your stimulus. So here's something I've done. This is just me being kind of crazy, but I enjoy doing this. Is I would do rest pause sets this way, and this works well actually for abs. It can, as long as you don't have breathing difficulties, you don't get kind of claustrophobic because it can make you feel like you're going to asphyxiate. It works for calves. It works for exercises. Actually, you can use it for all. I've done it with back before and rows. But so one thing you can do, like on a rest pause set, where you're taking a DC training rest pause set, is this is just one way to apply this. It's just the one that popped in my head. You're taking each of your sets to failure. So you would do set of 12 to failure, and then you take 12 breaths, and then you might end up getting 3 reps to failure, take 12 breaths. 2 reps to failure, take 12 breaths. Then you do a extended partial, extended negative, where you just lower the weight under control. Well, one thing that I have done with those to increase the effective time under tension, just to use that terminology, is I would go and do that set. Maybe I do 11 reps, and you can logbook this. So you can logbook 11 reps, and then my goal is to do partials, and these are very, very short. Get into a biomechanically and from a muscle mind perspective, good position for that exercise where I can really feel like I'm targeting the muscle. So if it's a row, it might be in the fully at the end of the range of motion, or a fully contracted, shortened for the lats, and try to double that count doing partials. So 10, 11, or it might be 10 and then 11, and then I try to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Try to do partials and count to 22.
Okay, yeah. That
might
brutal.
Be another 10, 12 seconds, and then I take the 12, 15 breaths, and then do regular reps, and let's say I get 4. Yeah. Then I try to do 8 partials with that one.
Okay.
So you can add effective reps that way, for instance, or effective time under tension that way.
Yeah.
And still have some modicum of monitoring your progressive overload, because that's how do you quantify that?
Right.
Those partials. I would just use that double rule, and you could make note whether you did or didn't feel like, use a sort of, be honest with yourself if you got those partials in there.
Yeah.
And there's going to be muscle groups that where you have to focus on effective reps. Some muscle groups that just grow whatever. You don't need to do any of that stuff. You just stop a few reps in reserve and you progress. And there might be others where you've got to increase the potency in ways like that, or this is why I have pump sets in Fortitude. And pump sets can just be higher rep sets with no partials. You don't have to do any of that craziness.
Yeah.
You can just do sets of 15 or sets of 20. Because that's a rep range where you can produce muscle growth. So
we've talked about my calves a bunch, but I never actually bring pictures up. So I just grabbed one here. Boom! There's some calves for the day.
And that's through your tights.
Yes. Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. All right. So we hit a bunch more. We'll try to maybe jump through these as quick as we can.
Right. I'll be brief.
Keith says most effective fasted cardio stack for fat loss, and he says, and what are the benefits of oral Alcar?
I don't know. You could say most effective for fat loss, most effective would be use as much stuff as you can tolerate. That's kind of an unfair question. Yeah. I'm not even going to go there. That's kind of a loaded question, the way I see it, because it's asking for a one size fits all scenario, and I just can't.
It'd be maybe a better question for drugs and stuff, where we wouldn't necessarily tell him this is the answer. But I'll tell you what, actually, we recently did an episode that was about fat burners, and we talked all about every fat burner, and we talked about the different categories. We didn't talk about L-carnitine, though. I mean, we could have added that in. That could have been one to add to the topic. But anyway, I think it could be better suited for that.
Yeah, here's a quick anecdote, just because that would literally require you can do an entire episode like you guys did on that. Yeah, is some people don't tolerate yohimbine with ephedrine very well.
Like me?
Years and years and what's that?
Like me?
That's you. Like you, yeah, right. Yeah. There was someone who, I think she was on a news group, maybe, and she went to the hospital. No, she was a client of she'd been taking, I think, ephedrine, and then she added yohimbine and tried to do cardio.
Yeah.
And she freaked out. She had to go to the hospital. She started losing her shit. So, yeah, that's just too cookie cutter to know.
Pete says, I had a motorcycle accident 20 years ago. I'm 63, and I've been doing 15 to 20 rep sets since. But lately, I started shaking about halfway through my workout. Should I change my workout to lower reps?
I would talk to a physical therapist. He seems like he's connecting the motorcycle accident with why he's shaking, so he knows there's something going on there. I would imagine that lower reps, meaning higher weight, could actually make things worse.
Yeah, I would think so too.
But I don't know what happened with this motorcycle accident. Did he have a spinal cord injury? Did he have a concussion? No idea. There's just way too much in there.
Or is it completely unrelated? Like, is he not getting enough hydration in lately, and he's been dehydrating his? You know what I mean? There's a lot of stuff that it's hard to say. But I get what you're saying. It sounds like he is for sure connecting it. And if so, I mean, is there some sort of nerve thing or something? That's not something that we could really get into.
If he's connected with this topic, though, like he's shaking during his workout, I assume he means like during those sets.
Yeah.
And if he's meaning lower his reps, like just stop when he starts to shake.
Oh.
Maybe that's where he's going with that. I'm just trying to figure out how he was thinking from the context.
Yeah, that could be it.
Yeah, I mean, it could be that he's got some sort of neuralgia going on or some sort of neuropathy.
He says, I'm thinking I'm killing my nervous system.
Okay, yeah. It sounds like if he thinks that, it's time for a deload, right?
Yeah.
But if it's related to a known injury from his motorcycle wreck, then talk to a medical professional, see what's what's possibly at play there.
Jonathan asks, are there any apps that we would recommend for the purpose of essentially having a logbook? I've been using Get Fit app, which tracks workouts pretty well. But for example, I created my own Fortitude Training split routine within the app, and my working set, days, weight, and reps get saved, and then my muscle round days, sets are saved and erase the workout sets. So it kind of defeats the purpose. Do you use any kind of app, Scott, or you just write it down on a notepad?
I just write it down on a notepad.
Yeah.
I like to have minimal phone. I usually like to listen. I use my watch for my MP3 player.
Yeah.
Basically, I like to leave my phone away. I looked like I'm trying to think what it was. There was an app that I tried out. It's hard to get things set up that work well for Fortitude Training because the different set types. And like with pump sets, you could do reverse 21s. You could do 5s into the hole. You could do a set of 12 with, try to double the partials. Like I mentioned with that rest pause idea, there's all sorts of things you could do. And, it's so much easier to write that down on your own.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big fan of phones while training at all. Become a bit of a smombie.
Oh, what?
You hear that term? A smombie. No. You heard that term?
No, yeah, what is
smartphone
that?
Zombie. Smartphone
zombie.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. You've seen the smombies in the gym. They're just like,
Yeah.
Right?
All right. Well, that's all we got for you guys. But listen, if you have any questions that you want to throw in for the next show, then definitely comment below. We can always use some good questions and topics. We'd love to come back and do some more stuff. And I hope this helps everybody. I think that my take-home point for the day is remind yourself this week what going to failure is. Remind yourself, redefine it. And therefore, if you want to do reps and reserves after that, at least you'll know, an updated version of what failure means, right?
Yeah. Just be honest with yourself. If you don't want to go to failure, then that makes perfect sense, But if it's the thing that's missing from producing progress, then throw it in there in an amount that you're willing to put up with.
Yeah.
Right. Some people see their personal trainer like once a week, right?
Yeah.
They can't afford it or whatever, and the personal trainer, they train harder with that personal trainer.
It sets the bar.
I had someone, of course, right? But they don't want to go in every time because they don't want to train that hard.
Yeah.
Right. They don't need that or whatever. So yeah, add it in the right dose that matches your psychological makeup.
Yeah.
So
BYOPT. That's Scott's new book.
Exactly. Yeah. Right.
That's not out yet, but you can go to byobb.com and you can check out Scott's book, Be Your Own Bodybuilding Coach. Or you go to Amazon, you get the hardcover. I'll be sure to have links to that, both of those things, in the description, as well as you can reach out to Scott for consultations. Scott's always doing consultations with people. So if you want to dig into something deeper, he's the man to turn to for stuff like that. You can reach out to me for coaching. I'll have my contact and Scott's information down below. And, of course, check out our sponsors, TrueNutrition.com. Like I said, man, Scott, I'll tell you, man, I've been using their creatine again. I forgot how great of a supplement creatine is. And
you hadn't been on it for a while, huh?
Well, and when I had been on the good stuff, the private stock, the UGLs and whatever else. So I had used creatine obviously early on when it first came out, and then beyond that, I would still take it while I was training on gear, and it was a lot of times in my pre-workouts anyway. But now I just went back on it 10 grams a day. I mix it in my coffee if I'm not training. I'll take it pre-workout if I am training. And I can see the difference in my pumps and my overall muscle fullness, just the way my clothes feel. It's crazy because having it as a control now, right? Because I'm not on any kind of cycles or anything. You can see the difference. You can feel the difference too. So it's kind of cool to see that.
Did your weight jump up a little bit?
I haven't been weighing myself. Yeah, I haven't been weighing myself.
Yeah.
I would guess minimally, a couple pounds, 2-3 pounds maybe though. And and one of the other reasons is the studies that have been done about improving cognitive function, especially with the aging brain. So I think it's only going to be beneficial for me to stay on creatine as I age.
Yeah. And there's a creatine phosphokinase shuttle
Okay.
that utilizes creatine phosphate as a molecule because it can diffuse more quickly across the fluid in the cytoplasm of the cell. So you've got various isoforms of creatine phosphokinase that are located throughout the cell, and basically it's sort of like you can load the high energy phosphate energy into creatine phosphate and let it with the creatine phosphokinase. So it takes ATP, converts it into creatine phosphate. Creatine phosphate then moves its way across the cell, and then where ATP is needed, the creatine phosphate is then converted back to ATP, and then ATP is used for whatever all the processes. Yeah, so you've got different CPK isozymes throughout in the cells of the nervous system as well. Yeah, it happens in skeletal muscle too. But so creatine it's not just like, more creatine phosphate, bigger store for that phosphagen source of energy for sprints and what have you.
Yeah.
It's also important as a diffusion, a means of diffusing high energy phosphate bonds from one place to another. So it'll move things across the cell based on where they're being used. So creatine phosphate will go down its diffusion gradient to where it's needed, and then can be converted to ATP to be used. So it's a pretty badass little molecule, creatine phosphate.
$25-$30, you can get a big old bag of it from True Nutrition, which I'll take that, order that up with my collagen and everything else. And like I said, in the morning I'll mix it into my coffee now, along with the collagen, and it's completely flavorless. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't make a difference. It's not like I have to choke it down
nasty.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
so
right.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
Of course, check out supplementsource.ca for our Canadian folks. And thank you to everybody from Patreon. We have a thread running right now taking questions for the next shows. Comment over there if you're from Patreon with shows for muscle or questions for Muscle Minds, and we will definitely tackle them the next time that we are together. Scott, as always, man, it's been a pleasure.
This was fun. Thanks, brother.
Thank you. And see you guys. Thanks for watching on the live stream.